Welcome to Talking Jazz. My guest today is Caroline Davis, saxophonist, extraordinaire composer, activist, educator, and I'm so looking forward to find out everything about her and her music.
Thanks for having me.
Glad you could make it. Usually I start out asking everybody just about their background. What got you into music, especially jazz? It's not the most straightforward path to decide on for most. So give us a little glimpse into early Caroline.
Well, my family is European. I've been raised by mostly by my mother, who's Swedish, and was born and raised there and left there when she was in her later teenage years to come to New York to go to a school up in Troy called Russell Sage. She was an actress back then who desperately wanted to be a Shakespearean actress. She changed her path to work in the corporate world as in advertising, but for eventually and to be a real estate agent. And then now she's retired. But I learned a lot about how to be backstage and just the hang of being at a show from my mom. And I think that early sort of, hey, I'm backstage, look at all the actors and like everyone's hanging out back here. And then after the show, people are going out and like getting a drink. And I was a little, very little girl. And I think that really influenced me to want to be in the hang and to be a part of a community of artists. And then my parents split when I was pretty young, but I was always in my dad's life, and he was more kind of into like jam bands and rock and roll. Really that classic guy from the 60s, and he's British. He was British, he passed away, but he lived in Switzerland for the last 30 years of his life, and I had visited him in Switzerland a few times. Anyway, his musical visions were really loving rock music and Santana and all the improvising, sort of letting loose in that context. And he also really loved like a good horn section. So I was really, he was always turning on like Chicago or the Steve Miller Band or even Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones, anything with Quincy Jones producing. And so I had those like little horn lines, like those kinds of things always in my head and kind of funky music like that. And so I think those two things paired together really instilled a love for wanting to be an artist and be limitless and have the freedom to express myself.
That's really cool. Yeah, those 60s dads.
I know, right?
And
Yeah.
then you grew up in Chicago though, right? Is that correct?
I grew up partially, I was born in Singapore, and then I started playing saxophone when I was living in Atlanta, Georgia with my mom. And I was a swimmer before. I was really serious about swimming, and then my mom's, and then I was like, oh, I want to play music, and we're like, oh, we have to choose which thing we're gonna do. So I chose the music thing, and I did like the whole you go to the band class, and they're like, you're gonna be a good bassoonist, or you're gonna be, and they were like, you should play saxophone. So I was like, okay. And my only pop culture reference to saxophone was like Lisa Simpson from The Simpsons, and I was like, okay. But then also, my dad with all the bands and everything, these horn sections, I was like, okay, I think I know what saxophone sounds like, and I tried it, and I, could get a pretty good sound. And then really where I got better at playing the instrument was when we moved to Texas, because in Texas, like the band scene is pretty intense there. There's all these competitions, and there's like marching band, and I played in marching band for many years. And that was really cool in terms of the community. Not cool to march around in the Texas heat in like 100-degree weather, but I really enjoyed myself. And I started hanging out with some of the weirder kids and, sort of being on the fringe of things. I think that I've always been on the outside, sort of like on the fringe and doing something different. And so that sort of pushed me into that direction. Then when I moved to Chicago, I was about 21
Oh.
or 22. So yeah, I was a little older and had been exposed to alternative forms of music through the Litchfield Jazz Camp, which I went to when I was living in Texas, but that's in Connecticut at camp. And I met Mario Pavone and, some other more straight ahead people like Jimmy Green, saxophonist, and Chris Allen, David Berkman, who's kind of in between for me in terms of like he's playing straight ahead, but he's also playing his beautiful compositions, and started listening to him, and I loved like Sam Newsom, and Sam Newsom is like a different kind of a saxophone player, and he's one of my favorite ones for his mode of expression, the ability to play in these straight ahead contexts and play through like changes and play within a groove and time based improvisation setting, but then also being very open and free to do sort of the outer limits of this music. So, and then I learned a lot about that through Von Freeman in Chicago by going to his jam sessions at the New Apartment Lounge, and I met all of the people surrounded with his mode of expression. And I also would go to the Velvet Lounge, which was Fred Anderson's club, and I was introduced to his mode of expression and the people who were playing there, like Nicole Mitchell. I met earlier on Tamika Reed there, and Vincent Davis, and there's just so many people who had been involved with that community. And then also there's another community in Chicago that was sort of surrounded by the Hungry Brain and this other little club, Hottie of Scotty, where I would go and see Jim Baker and Dave Rempis, Frank Rosalie, Tim Daisy a lot when I was living there. So there were all these different kinds of, and then also last but certainly not least, but like the sort of people who were playing in Evanston all the time, which is where I lived. And that was, people like Bobby Broom and Ron Perillo and Dennis Carroll, Dana Hall, I met there. And Mike Alamana, who also played in Von Freeman's band, I saw him play at Pete Miller's a few times in Evanston. But it was just sort of these different kinds of communities, and I really liked all of them. I liked going and listening to people play standards, and I liked going and listening to people play free or play their original music or play aggressively or play more sensitively.
Oh, makes sense. And I didn't realize you had such a multicultural background from many parts of the world, which, obviously contributes to being open to all these kinds of influences. So this first tune that we're going to listen to is from your latest release, which is called Portals Volume 1 Morning. And it's dedicated, I guess, to the memory of your dad, it sounds like. So what should we listen to in an acephalous placebo? You'll have to explain that to us.
All the songs in this album are dedicated to my dad in different ways. So some of them express mostly what I was thinking about when I was putting together sort of the concept of the titles and all of the things like that, and was the textures of grief that I was experiencing. So sometimes it would really be like a feeling, like I'm really feeling like things are I feel like stabbing pains, and then that's really harsh to me. And then now I'm feeling really more like my hand is running up against stone, and that's how I feel. And then, but today, now I really just want to be wrapped in cotton, that texture. And so I was thinking a lot about textures and how to sort of honor them. Acephalous placebo is sort of in the wet realm of things, feeling like I want to be inside of water. So that word acephalous is just like a fancy word for headless. It just means like having no head. And then placebo is drawing from this book that my dad read called You Are the Placebo by Joe Dispenza. He's like a neuroscientist who's really interested in self-help and teaching everybody that you are the reason for getting in the way of your dreams and your aspirations in life. And so putting those two words together, what I meant by that is sometimes these sort of headless or these headless placebos, the ones that seemingly have no like logical basis for medically work for you. And so I wanted to sort of use this music to help listeners understand that part of my dad's vision of healing, for getting better, using these sort of techniques that other people would be like, what are you doing?
I guess the best way to understand is just listen to and see how it sounds like. That's why we have music, because we can say things that, even fancy words might not be able to say. So the Acephalous Placebo is from the new album by my guest today, Caroline Davis. It features Marquis Hill on the trumpet, of course, Caroline on alto saxophone, Julian Shore on the piano, Chris Tordini on the bass, Alan Mednar on drums, and we also have strings with it, with Mass Swift, Josh Henderson, Joanna Matry, and Marielle Roberts. Here we
our
go.
own slippery energy.
was Cephalus Placebo, a selection from the new album Portals Volume 1 Morning by my guest today, Caroline Davis. We were just talking a little bit about her background and her very multicultural and multi-geographic upbringing. I think that has a lot to do with your willingness to experiment and try new things. And this next one that we're going to hear, you were definitely experimenting with all kinds of things. When I was listening to it, it sounded like bagpipes on steroids. So explain a little bit how you put that together and all the background musically.
Yeah, I recently made the purchase of the Crittering Guitar organelle unit, and I've been doing a lot of solo playing since the pandemic, more so. And I was asked to do a few solo shows in September, and so I put a tour together where I was using my pedals, that pedal in particular, that organelle, and in addition to a loop station, been sort of exploring for many years pedals and electronics with my saxophone sound. And so that whole track was me using this mod on the organelle called granular synthesis. I was just sort of exploring, and while at the same time reading the George Jackson prison letters and thinking a lot about Black August, which is a time of year in the month of August where we honor the memory of George Jackson, who was a freedom fighter and visionary who wrote these really wonderful prison letters. He was originally put in prison for stealing $40 from some kind of, it was I don't even really know the details, but it was like the most ridiculous reason to put someone behind bars, and just one of the most well written books for people who are interested in prison abolition and learning more about freedom fighters who had been in prison, especially people who are associated with the Black Panther Party. It's really a helpful text. And so I was reading that book and thinking about the force of nature that is freedom fighting. You know, we hear a lot about people like Angela Davis, and especially with her relationship to gender. And so some of that book, The Prison Letters, can seem a little bit in the realm of patriarchy, because there is like not a strong sense of where women belong. And I think Angela Davis writes a lot about that in her texts, in her books, Women Race Class. And so we have a different perspective from her. But I was thinking about the force of nature that is a freedom fighter, that it takes to be present in a situation where you have been stripped of all your rights. You've been put behind bars. You can't go outside. You can't leave your cell. You can't communicate with other people.
Fascinating. Yeah. I think the best thing is just to listen to and take it in, but thanks for explaining how you use the pedals and make the effects.
I wanted to mention too that I've been really involved with Keith Lamar, who's a very good friend of mine, and he was on death row for a crime that he didn't commit. That sort of had been the impetus for me being involved with the prison abolition movement and people who are involved with Keith's case. I've become very deep friends with. Just visited him at the Ohio State Penitentiary a couple weeks ago, and that was a really unique experience, and I was so grateful to spend all this time with him in person. But it is a very huge problem that we have here in this country, continue to have, with a lot of innocent people behind bars, including all the freedom fighters in these movements.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that to our attention and reminding us. So this track is coming out pretty soon, right? On a compilation.
Yep, it's on a compilation record that's put together by a friend of mine in Montreal named Joni Void. This is called Time Capsule, the compilation, and it will be coming out very soon.
Well, here's Black August by my guest today, Caroline Davis. was Black August, a track done solo with lots of effect pedals by my guest today, Caroline Davis. We'll go back to the album we heard some taste initially, which is your Portals Volume 1 Morning, dedicated to the memory of your dad. And this is Left. It has string quartet on it, it has spoken words, and it's pretty involved. You know, that takes a lot of time to write all these things. So I believe you had the chance for a retreat at McDowell. Tell us a little bit about your writing process and what you were able to do given that time and space.
Yeah, it was almost a situation where I didn't go because my father had passed days before my residency was going to start. I think he died on February 29th and the residency started on like March 4th or something, and I had to go to Switzerland for his funeral, which was pretty, quickly after that. Just went straight back home and boarded a bus to get to Keene, New Hampshire, where I went then to Peterborough. And it was just a really tough time to be alone. But I mean, luckily at McDowell, there is a very strong sense of community at that residency. And so I met some really nice people there who I'm still in contact with now, who helped me. Some of them really helped me through the grieving process by helping me find the right poetry and the right words to deal. I was reading a lot of poetry back then. And so some of the things that you hear on the album are little snippets of my own writing. They're very short phrases that are inspired by things that my dad said to me or things that he told me, like, how do you stop a drop of water from evaporating? And the answer is throw it into the sea. And it's just like these little snippets of his life that I wanted to encapsulate inside of these little they're almost like funny tropes for me from him. But yeah, I mean, I wrote all of the seeds for the album at McDowell. I didn't like finish arranging and orchestrating, but I did write all of the material. I think I did complete one song there, but again, shaping and sculpting the music took me a lot longer, and it took me about a year to arrange and learn more about strings. And at McDowell, I was also trying to look at all these different fretboards to see what's possible for strings and look into the world of extended techniques for strings, which I'm really fascinated by, scordatura and all these sort of ways to use the bow to get different textures. Because again, most of my processing of grief was textural.
That's really interesting. Yeah, so we'll hear some of that. So we're going to listen to Left, which is from Portals Volume 1 Morning, 2021 release by my guest today, Caroline Davis. And we'll hear some of the experts of the spoken word and, of course, the string quartet. Here we go.
Will we feel lighter, gritty stars?
just left a selection from Portals Volume 1, Morning, a recent album by my guest today, Caroline Davis, who you heard on saxophone and who also is the composer. We'll see a little bit of different side of you now. The electronics are coming back, but also vocals, which is interesting domain to expand on. When I was listening to it, it reminded me a little bit about Jacob Collier and his layering of all the harmonies, and it's really cool, especially that the keyboard break. Tell us a little bit about that album and how you put it together.
So in Chicago, I started this band, Maitri, and it was a different spelling of the word back then, Maitri, which is a Sanskrit word that means loving kindness through yourself and others. So sort of learning to love yourself, and while at the same time learning to love others. And I learned about that through the writings of Pema Chodron, who's a really wonderful healer and meditation guru. She wrote about this concept, and I wanted to write songs. And I started that back in 2009 in Chicago again, when I was going through a really rough emotional patch. And so I had to learn how to sing. Through the years, I've taken all these different lessons and tried my hand at it. It's still, I think, the hardest instrument that you can play, because it's in your body, and you have to really take care of your body in order for your voice to be in its prime. Put out an album by myself when I was in Chicago with a band that I put together there of mostly jazz musicians, and a friend of mine who's an MC there, whose name is Neek, who's really incredible. He's probably put out 20 albums on his own, but he's a rapper in Chicago, and I wanted to work with him on a couple tracks there. And then I moved to New York, and I sort of rekindled the band here in New York with my friend, and now he's my partner, Ben Hoffman, who plays keyboards, and now in the band he helps to we all write the music together, me and Ben. And so we did an album back then called Afterglow, and then now we put this album out last year called Where the Grace Is, and this song, One More Time, is on that album. And I came up with the hook when I was standing on the train platform in Brooklyn, waiting for the train, and just thinking about death, and thinking about how we would all wish that we'd have one more time to do something, kind of looking around and seeing like the things that I think I quote, in air quotes, need in my life, and how that might be something that's deceiving to me. Like what I need is what you need might be deceiving, and then what you see might be real grieving. Face your life, uncover bleeding, and then what you find will be true healing. So just kind of these ways to put into words the preciousness of life.
That's very cool, and it's an amazing track. There's some very fabulous playing on it too. All right, one more time. Better think about it one more time. So this is from the album Where the Grace Is, together with Ben Hoffman. And you're going to hear my guest today, Caroline Davis, also on vocals on this.
This is what we do. This is what we say we do. This is what we do. This is what we say we do. One more time. One more life. One more time. One more life. One more time. One more life. One more time. What you need may be deceiving.
That was One More Time, a selection from the album Where the Grace Is by my guest today, Caroline Davis. So we have one more to share. This actually features one of my colleagues during my student days, Matt Mitchell. We went to school together. Curious, what's next? Where are you going? I mean, something that we definitely learned about is you're always reading some interesting books and getting inspired. So what's next in Caroline's world?
This band, Alula, was a project I put together to incorporate electronic elements into my sort of recorded output. And I was lucky to work with Matt Mitchell, who's one of my favorite composers and musicians of today, and a very good friend. And then Greg Saunier, who is a drummer I've been listening to for probably 20 years through different outfits that he plays in, but majority speaking, I've listened to him in Earhoof, which is a really incredible rock band. And I wanted to put them together in a context with electronics. And I'm doing that again with the same name of the band, but a different lineup, a different personnel. And this time it will be with Taishan Sori and Val Janti and Qasim Naqvi, who's playing on a couple tracks on this record, and Chris Tordini, who's playing upright bass, acoustic bass, and electric bass. Well, he's playing key bass, so it's like the key bass, electronic bass, electric bass. So that project will be coming out next year in 2023 under the name Alula, and the record will be called Captivity, as it is dedicated to not all of but a lot of people who I've considered to be freedom fighters and their time behind bars, their time in captivity. The word Alula comes from another book that I've read, or really didn't read, but kind of like leafed through the Sibley Guide to Birds. And I was checking out anatomy of birds, and I was like, oh, I really love that word. It's a great word, Alula. And really what it is a structure that includes a couple bones and like some ligaments of a wing of the bird, and it only comes out when they're taking off and in flight and landing. It's kind of like a thumb, and you can see it kind of protruding out, but it only comes out in these certain moments. It's also called the bastard wing because it could be seen by some as unnecessary to the anatomy of the bird, but it does help in these moments of like steadying themselves, birds. Anyway, the first record was really every track sort of influenced by things I had been reading about this structure. But this album is about these freedom fighters, and I always associated somehow birds with also being in captivity because we put them behind bars as we do our people. So that's coming out, and I'm really excited about it. I'm also doing a new project at the Jazz Gallery this coming December, featuring a band with some of my favorite improvisers, including Angelica Sanchez and Chris Tordini and Keng Chikaj, and another dear friend, Selena Trepp, on visuals. That's a commission that the gallery had commissioned me for this year. And then I'm recording Portals Volume 2 at the end of December with my same band that's on Portals 1, but no strings. And this album will be for my grandmother's poetry. And so there's going to be some vocalists and an MC, and I'm so excited about all of that.
I love how you put all the different threads of your life together in, this form of expression, and makes a lot of sense. But Alula and birds and freedom fighters, I can absolutely see that, it's the quest to fly and get away from those boundaries.
Yeah, and so we're listening. This track, Wing Beat, is from the first Alula record released in 2019. It was based on the ratios of this structure on a bird wing from an article, like this article that I read about a European magpie bird. So I just took the numbers and I created like a pitch set in one voice and a pitch set in the other voice, and it repeats the same pitch set the whole time, but the rhythms are changing and the ordering of the pitches is like moved around until at the very end of the song, you hear a succession of pitches all in a row. And that's when you hear like the nervous sort of part of it. There's also a music video to go along with this song. If people are interested in watching it, it's on YouTube. And my friend Davey Lazar edited it with all these different videos of birds flying or taking off. Yeah, the structure of the alula can influence the wing beat of a bird. So that's how fast a bird can wave its wings. I don't pretend to know much about ornithology, but it's really fascinating to me. All of the sounds that can be made that birds make. The sound of a bird flapping its wings, like that is really it's really a fascinating sound if you listen to it. So I was going for that in this track. You'll hear that.
And throughout history, we see a lot of composers looking at birds, usually at the sounds they make, not so much the sound of the wings, and so much fascinating things. And, of course, hummingbirds will probably produce the fastest. Thank you, Caroline, for spending the time and sharing really fascinating ideas and thoughts and inspirations with us. And for anybody to find out more, we'll go carolinedavis.com. Is that right?
.org.
.org, and it's a Caroline with the E at the end. And yes, find out all about this cool music and get some. So we'll dive into Wing Beat from Alula, a 2019 release featuring my guest Caroline Davis on alto saxophone, effects, compositions, Matt Mitchell on synthesizers, and Greg Saunier on the drums. Thank you. My guest today was saxophonist, composer, educator, activist Caroline Davis. You can hear Talking Jazz every Thursday at 11 a.m. and Mondays at 7 p.m. on WETF 105.7 in South Bend, Indiana, or online at jazzradiowetf.org, and Fridays at 8 p.m. on WICR 88.7 Indianapolis. Previous shows are also on my YouTube channel, Monika Herzig, MonikaHerzig. Please subscribe to the Talking Jazz playlist. Thank you for listening.